Some other factors that play into discretion, there's peer factors. Essentially, peer factors are a police officer's discretion may be affected by his relationship with their peers, his or her relationship, in two distinct ways. Peers may provide or withhold approval, and officers who desire the respect and friendship of peers may alter decisions to comply with norms and cultural behavior expectations. There's situational factors. Demeanor is a way in which a person outwardly manifests his or her personality. Officers may be more punitive to suspects who are overly aggressive or disrespectful. And the way a crime or situation is enforced may affect the discretion as well. And then, of course, there's extra legal factors. Research is mixed as to whether police take race, class, or gender into account when making arrest decisions. Racial profiling, of course, is a practice. It has been used for a long time, and it is being more and more frowned upon in police agencies, but it still exists. This is the practice of police targeting minority groups because of a belief that they are more likely to engage in criminal activity. Of course, when we talk about the problems of policing, job stress is number one. Policing causes stress in reference to its constant vigilance. You're on duty 24 hours, 7 days a week. There's also an internal conflict with administrative policies. Another thing is it's difficult to leave the job when you're not on duty. It's difficult to put down the role of police or of police agent when you step away from it to take some rest. And the lack of equipment training and supervisory support also create some serious issues. How do we combat stress? Well, support in the workplace and training in stress management. We can also get police officers to think about diet or embrace things like biofeedback, maybe yoga, relaxation and meditation, exercise, all good ways for police officers to combat stress. Fatigue is a real issue. It can cause injury and diminished decision-making processes. Long shifts can create bad decisions. Controlling fatigue is a important aspect of your departmental perspective. One way to do this is limit overtime, and of course limitation of second jobs, and then of course limitation of long shifts. Those are recipes for disaster. Another issue that they have to deal with is violence and brutality. A small percentage of officers are involved in use of force incidents, and overreaction to stress and social isolation play roles in how these individuals administer and use that force. Departments are really trying to curb violence through specialized training programs by identifying people who might be slipping through the cracks or using violence and force more often. So looking for those early warning signs. Administrative policies that frown upon this. And then, of course, this threat of civil judgment. We live in a day and age of video recording. And as police officers, you need to understand that everything is being recorded by somebody or by something. And your actions are being held under scrutiny way more today than they have been in the past. Another policing problem, of course, is corruption. When you deal with crime and you set yourself on curbing it, well, that brings you in contact with it as well. And If you're not making a whole lot of money, then you're susceptible to being turned to the criminal enterprise. What is corruption? Well, it's exercising legitimate discretion for improper reasons or using illegal means to achieve approved goals. There's some varieties of corruption. The meat eaters versus the grass eaters. This is a term for police officers who actively solicit bribes and vigorously engage in corrupt practices. They're the meat eaters. And the grass eaters are a term for police officers who accept payoffs when everyday duties place them in a position to look the other way. Let's see here. Some causes of corruption. Of course, greed. The police may be motivated by greed or the desire to maintain a middle-class lifestyle, even though their actual salaries will not allow it. Police officers may misbehave because they can get away with it, and if they're questioned, they can explain that they use their discretion. And police officers may rationalize that nobody really cares about their corruption and that the public really will not care if they do not enforce vice-related behaviors vigorously. Nobody's really watching and nobody really cares. How do we control corruption? Well, police officers are held accountable to their supervisors for their behavior and or lack of their behaviors. We need to strengthen that internal administrative review. We need to hold them accountable. We need outside review boards and special prosecutors to deal with police crimes. And we need citizen review boards to review everybody. Because this system is ripe for corruption. And we have to be diligent, and we have to have these unbiased boards to hold these people who enforce the laws accountable when they break them. Of course, we get back to the use of force. It's very uncommon, or it's not very common. 17% of U.S. residents have had face-to-face contact with police. 9 out of 10 who had contact with those officers felt that the officers acted properly. In 1.4% of all stops, the officers either used or threatened to use force. And African Americans and Hispanics who were 2 to 3 more times more likely than whites to be searched during traffic stops. The National Survey of Police Contacts with Civilians and sponsored by the federal government found that relatively few contacts with police and the public involve physical force, and that there seems to be race and ethnic differences in the rate at which force is applied. Force should always be as a last resort. And deadly force, especially, should only be used when the police officer's life is threatened. I was a Marine. The use of deadly force was the absolute last resort. You needed to have tried other things in order to get the person to stop what they were doing before you even thought about using deadly force. Deadly force that is likely to cause death or bodily harm is real, of course. We now have to think about things like suicide by cop, or a form of suicide in which a person acts in an aggressive manner with police officers in order to induce them to shoot or kill them. These new uses of deadly force and the implications of them have really put us in a position where we're trying to control deadly force now. One of the big cases that has forced us to relook at this is Tennessee versus Garner. This is limited to escape situations that threaten the officer or a citizen. Of course, State jurisdictions control police shooting policy. Some have been updated and upgraded in their training and use of force. The use of force continuum are giving way to objective reasonableness standards. And then internal review of the use of force incidents allows administrators to identify training problems. This approach is controversial because the department can recommend one of its officers be turned over for criminal prosecution. Well, one of the things that the general public has a problem with policing at this moment is that when they do use deadly force, it's almost always either brushed under the rug, or the police officers are not found guilty, or they're found innocent. And this is a real issue of contention between the general public and policing. And as we move forward, we're going to have to really think about how we address this in a way that makes policing whole, and at the same time, it makes the community being policed whole as well. There, of course, is non-deadly force, or any level of force not likely to cause death or bodily harm. Researchers have found that the crime is strongly linked to the type of non-deadly force used, and that the officers are influenced by past experience, the presence of other officers, and the presence of and behaviors of bystanders when they're considering the use of non-deadly force or deadly force. It's estimated that non-deadly force is used in 1.7% of contacts, and that 20% of all arrests have some sort of non-deadly force used in them. And then we have to take in consideration the idea of objective reasonableness, which was codified in law with Graham versus Connor. This may include verbal commands, verbal control commands, control holds, chemical incapacities, tasers, strikes or punches, chemical kinetic hybrids, i.e. pepper spray, baton or impact weapons, incapacitation holds, and kinetic weapons or munitions like beanbags. And let's keep in mind that non-deadly force does sometimes kill people. A rubber bullet can kill somebody. So just because we say the use of non-deadly force methods, that doesn't mean that somebody cannot die from them. Less than lethal weapons are becoming part of policing. As we talked about, beanbags, rubber bullets, pepper pellets, and things like that. And then, of course, we want to take in consideration police searches and interrogations. But I'll finish these last 3 slides up in the last part of the lecture.